The release of one of these ions allows actin and myosin to bind to each other and cause contraction. Most of you said calcium, and most of you are correct. And why do I bring this up? Again, if you don't know this, you might want to go back to my lectures on muscle tissue. So I bring this up because what if you have a conducting cell passing on a bunch of sodium and calcium to a cardiomyocyte? Well, it's going to push it toward the threshold, therefore firing off the action potentials. Now, if you remember my lectures from the muscle tissue, so there's something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So sarcoplasmic reticulum is just a fancy name for the endoplasmic reticulum, but inside a muscle cell. So if you remember things about the endoplasmic reticulum, like, okay, you have ribosomes in the rough ER, you have things like synthesis of lipids in the smooth ER, but the sarcoplasmic reticulum is more than that in a muscle cell. It's also a very important reservoir, and it's like it stores calcium. So when you have these action potentials in a cardiomyocyte, it actually triggers the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, why does that matter? It deals with skeletal, or in this case, well, it's saying skeletal muscle in this figure, but this happens in all muscle cells that have actin and myosin. So what we have here is that, notice that we have calcium and binds to that protein called troponin. Troponin moves away tropomyosin, and with tropomyosin out of the way, it allows actin and myosin to bind to each other. And this is my analogy. So I like to think of myosin heads like these little people, but the thing is that we have this protein called tropomyosin typically covering up actin. But when you have calcium, what happens? Well, it allows this sort of like, or it allows tropomyosin to move away from actin. And when you have actin freed up and moving away from freed up without tropomyosin blocking it, now myosin can bind to actin. Now myosin can pull actin via these myosin heads. Now you can have contraction. If you want relaxation, cover up actin with tropomyosin again, and you have relaxation. All right, so that's why calcium is very important for not only the action potentials, but the overall contraction of these muscle cells. So what you learned today, action potentials is how the heart coordinates its own beating. It's still affected by the brain, but this is how you're able to pass these signals, but not only pass these signals along. Once it reaches those ventricular cardiomyocytes, you have calcium interacting with the whole actin, myosin, troponin, tropomyosin complex and allowing contraction. Yeah, that's a lot. But again, this is why I put the recordings up. I don't expect everyone to get it the first time. I didn't get it the first time when I heard it in a lecture. So again, and if you're starting out, and as posted in the chat, the membrane and potential action potentials refresher, that is what I compiled from last semester. So it kind of allows you, I think I cover membrane potential a little more in detail there. You can also go to these lectures as well, so that might work for everybody. All right, so I'm glad that we had great participation today. And I'm glad, I want to thank everybody who, especially those of you who stay over time, and those of you who have been constantly making an effort to learn this stuff, because again, it pays off in the long term, and it's better you learn it now. And even if you forget it, if it's somewhere back in your brain, it's going to make it easier when you come up with this stuff again. Heart arrhythmia caused by the pacemaker and something else. Ooh, yeah, so it can be the pacemaker. But it depends, like there are several different types of arrhythmia. Sometimes the conduction system itself can contribute to arrhythmias. And there's something, especially there's this cool type called, if you look at the conduction system, you notice that it's starting from SA node and follows that sequence. There's also another subtype of arrhythmia called reentry arrhythmia, so where it actually forms a loop and can cause additional heartbeats because if it starts looping upon itself, it can sometimes cause additional contractions when it's not supposed to be happening. But yeah, arrhythmia that would be a cool, like, make it very broad. But yeah, arrhythmias, there are several types. But yeah, it all involves the conduction system in some extent. Yeah, pacemaker cells are definitely one thing that can cause arrhythmias, but There are other types of arrhythmias that are caused by some sort of defect or sometimes injury to the conduction system.